Fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. Just like anything else in life, you got to crawl before you walk, you got to run before you walk, etc. And I said it in my previous video, and I'm going to say it again. Just like the GOAT Kobe said, everybody asked him how he was so great in one of his famous interviews, and he said he was so great because he just focused on nothing but the fundamentals. So today we're going to focus on one of the computer networking fundamentals that this same kind of philosophy applies to, which is just basic configuration of SSH. And you're going to have to get this down because this is just one of the fundamentals of computer networking is configuring SSH. And I'm saying this to say it to myself because I can't do it in my sleep, but you just got to continue to practice it till it just becomes second nature, that kind of thing. So that's what we'll be going over today in this video for today's lab. And I'm just going to build this lab from scratch. Hopefully it won't take that long and we'll just run right through it. It should be just a short lab that you can follow along with in Packet Tracer. But before we begin, let's go ahead and discuss what is SSH. So an official definition of SSH is it's a protocol that you use to remotely manage a networking device from the command line in a secure way. Basically, that's all that's saying is that you have a way to remote into these devices, but there are other protocols out there like Telnet. Telnet allows you to remotely manage a device as well, but everything is not encrypted. Where SSH is more secure, because all of the information that's going over that session, that SSH session that you establish with that device, is being encrypted. So that's what SSH is, just to give you a basic foundation for when you start configuring and verifying it, which is one of the exam topics that you're going to have to study if you're trying to get that CCNA. All right, so let's get to it and get in this lab in this Packet Tracer and throw up some of these routers and get it all configured here. And just so y'all can see kind of the behind the scenes of what I do to create these labs, this one's going to be a basic SSH lab, so you can just see from beginning to end. All right, we back in the lab. You already know what it is, but this time we don't got nothing up here, so you can pick any one of these routers. You got 2901, 4331s. I'm going to just throw up two of these right here. Now, you could just do this by just using one router and just testing that SSH by SSH into itself, but I don't like to do it like that. I just want to put two routers and then throw up a little cable between them. Just grab a straight through cable here, go into gig 00, boom. Then you just get into the silly. Let me expand that. No, we don't want to enter the initial dialog. So first things first, when you're configuring SSH, you're going to need some public and private keys. These keys are going to allow for that SSH session to be established. I also did another video of generating some SSH keys on an Ubuntu machine. This is for a Cisco networking device, but definitely if you want to check out that to help just reinforce this concept of what SSH is. But anyways, back to this one. So to generate these keys and to even configure SSH, first off, in these networking devices, you're going to have to create a host name for the router. So since this is the first router we logged into, we'll just go into privilege exec mode right there with the enable command, and then config mode with conft. And then the command to configure a host name for it is hostname, and then we'll just use R1 since this is the first one we're in. Now, you're also going to need another name. You're going to need to create a domain name. This is just part of the protocol for SSH. It needs a domain name. It could be any name you want to name it. So the command to do that is going to be IP domain dash name. Now, again, it could be any name that you want to name it. So we'll just put lab.com. You could put whatever you want for your lab. I'm going to just put lab.com. Now, if you didn't configure a host name or IP domain name, the router will error out when you try to generate these keys and tell you that it's going to need domain names and everything. You'll see the log message and all of that. But I already went through that just so y'all didn't have to. So again, if you want to, just don't configure domain name and then try to generate these keys like I'm about to right now. So the next step after we've satisfy those requirements of creating that host name and a domain name, we're going to want to generate the keys, right? So it's crypto, and then let's just use our context sensitive help. Key generate RSA, and then what type of RSA keys? We're going to do general, and like it says right there, generate a general purpose RSA key pair, right, for signing and encryption. So that's what that general keys keyword is doing, is generating that key pair, that public and private key pair that you need for the SSH session to be established. And then it's going to be modulus. And then right here, depending on your iOS version, you'll have a different range, but modulus is just setting that level of encryption that you want on the key. And that's the different byte sizes, right? So you got 360 on the low end, 4096 on the high end. Usually I just use 2048 when I'm doing this, if I've done it in a production environment, or just when I'm labbing. You can use 1024, 768. Again, that's just how complex that key is, because the more bytes you add, the more complex that key is. Once you hit that, you'll see generating 2048-bit RSA keys. Everything went okay. And then see the name for the keys will be for r1.lab.com. But this is where it would error out if you didn't put that domain name. All right, so our next step for SSH is we want to configure the VTY lines. These VTY lines is what SSH is going to use to communicate and establish its session over. And by default, these lines will accept any kind of remote communication, but for this lab, we want to lock it down. And specifically, we don't want Telnet to be able to go over these lines because it uses these VTY lines to establish a session. So if anybody wanted to Telnet to this box, they would be able to, but we don't want to do that. We just want to lock it down. So if we only want SSH protocol to run over these lines, you got to go line VTY and then specify the lines, the number of lines, right? And then you got 15 lines on this box. It may differ on some other versions, but I usually just do all of them, right? And then you're going to do transport, input, SSH. Now that just locks down these VTY lines. Nothing else can come over that other than any kind of SSH traffic is going to be able to come over that VTY line. Also, let's take a look at what's currently configured on these VTY lines. If we do a do show run and then line, do show run, and then do section line, right? These are the lines that I'm talking about. And as you can see, you have this login keyword right here. Basically, that keyword is to specify how to log in when you're coming over these lines, is how I understand it, right? So for that, we want to specify that we want to use a username, because that's how SSH works. You got to provide it a username and password. So to do that, you do login, and then you get some options right here. And then you got authentication and local. Since we're not doing anything fancy with AAA, if you know about that, we're just going to use the word local, the keyword local here. That just tells the router to check the local username and password database to log in anybody that's trying to come over for SSH. So basically, the box will now, if you try to use SSH to connect to it, it's going to prompt the user for a username and password and then check it against its own local username database. So that leads us to our next step, where we're going to have to configure that username / password database for this SSH session. So if we get out of this, all you have to do is username, and we're going to go Cisco because we're in the lab. And then we could just kind of context sensitive help. Privilege level. Privilege level is how much you want them to be able to do on this box. We're going to just do 15, which is going to be the highest level of privilege that somebody can get. 0 being the lowest level of privilege, meaning they can't really do anything on the box. And then you're going to configure the password. So we could do password or secret. The difference between these is in the running config, if we just configure using the keyword password, if somebody got into this box some kind of way and they did a show run, they would be able to just see in plain text what the SSH password is in our username database that we're creating here. But if we wanted to encrypt that, which we want to do, we'll just use secret, and that's going to encrypt the password that we're going to set. And then you just type in whatever that password is, and the secret password we're going to use is Cisco. Now, since we're using 2 boxes in this lab to try to SSH from one box to the other, we're going to have to configure some IP addresses. So we'll start by configuring the IP address on this interface, and then when we jump over to the other box, we'll configure another IP address in the same subnet. That way we can have IP connectivity, and then on top of that, it can establish this SSH session. So our interface that we're connected to is gig 000. We're going to do a no shut on that guy. And then we're also going to do IP address. Let's just do that famous 192.168.1.1 with a /24 mask.0. And there we go. We got an IP address configured, and that should do it. This box should be ready to go for SSH. All right, finally, after we configured our IP address, the last thing we want to do is the SSH version. Currently, by default, it's not at the highest version of SSH that can be used with the most secure protocol and all of that. So what we want to do is specify the highest SSH version. So to do that, we'll get out of here, and then we just do SSH, and we can IP SSH. We do IP SSH, right? And then it's specify what version you want to use. And let's see, there's only 2 versions. We're going to use 2, which is the highest version. Now we have successfully completed the configuration of SSH. Now to verify it, we're going to have to jump over to that other router that we got sitting out there, configure it with an IP address, make sure there's IP connectivity, and then we can verify some things by jumping over to this box. So we'll just end this, right? Let's go ahead and save that config, because you just want to get in that, that muscle memory of saving that config. And then let's jump over here to this guy and get into the silly over here. Jump over here, no. And we'll just throw a host name on him just to get used to this kind of stuff. We'll put R2 for him. And then what we want to do is get on his interface, gig 000 as well. No shut that guy. And then we're going to put an IP address of him, 192.168.1.2, which is in the same subnet, 255.0. Now we should verify our ping connectivity real quick. You don't have to do this. I like to do this just to make sure, especially because we're in the lab. As you can see, we got full ping connectivity. Now to SSH, as you can see, you're going to have to specify that username, right? Because that's what SSH needs to go ahead and establish that connection. And then the username was Cisco. And then finally, all you got to do is put in the IP address of the box that we're trying to SSH to. And there you go. We do have an SSH session. Now it's prompting me for that password, that secret password. And now we're in here. All right, now that we did make it over to the other box, since we're limited in Packet Tracer with the iOS of how we can verify, other than just checking right here with R2, right, and the prompt changing to R1, especially after we logged in and everything right here, normally we can use the word who. That can show you some information to verify, but we can't do it on this box because, again, we're limited with this Packet Tracer iOS. So a couple other commands we can use is just a basic one is show SSH. Now this is going to show the in and out connections, the version that we're using for SSH, and the username that we're using, which is Cisco. So that kind of verifies it right there. And then if we do also show TCP, this will show you all the kind of TCP connections that we're listening on. And up here we can see, right, we got a local host and a foreign host. So 192.168.1.1, that's going to be the local. And then the foreign one is 192.168.1.2. That's the box that we're coming from. So that's just another way to verify that we're coming over port 22 on SSH. All right, there you have it, folks. Pretty basic rundown, a pretty down and dirty, quick little SSH lab that you could practice with in Packet Tracer and just develop that skill. As always, if you found any value in this content, I appreciate it. Please just like it, share it. Definitely subscribe, turn on them notification bells, because you know I'm dropping every week. I'm going to be hitting you with a video. And definitely drop in the comments if you want me to throw up a lab on something really specific that you're struggling with studying on. I'm definitely just here just trying to help and just trying to share my experience and my knowledge as much as I can. So again, I appreciate each and every one of y'all. Make sure y'all tap in, and I'm going to holler at y'all on that next video. Peace.